Hey guys, it's Melinda here, and today I decided to read another yet fanfiction, but this time it is Dan Phil, and it's actually one of my favorites. It made me cry, and it's actually my first official fanfiction that I read a couple weeks ago. Being in this fandom for like 4 years, you would think, oh, Melinda, like, why haven't you read fanfiction yet? It's like, I don't know, I just haven't. Recently, when I started my art projects and tried to work on them like a good student, I decided not to and rebel and read fanfiction instead. I picked a good choice because I found an author who has written many titles. They are really good. Their name is Phanci. Her stories, they are freaking amazing. What we are reading today is called Bad Boys Don't Smile, and that is just one out of many titles they have written. They have written Glass Mind, Speak, Blurry Face, Moods, Bad Boys Don't Smile, which is what we're reading today, and Anything is Inferior, and that is just her fan ones. They actually have a couple of others, but you should go check out her profile. Her name is Phanci on wattpad.com. Go check her out, or give her a vote, comment, and then follow her because she is an amazing writer. I love her to say this. In this particular video, I'm going to be trying something. So this is me. I am wearing white. You're going to see two other versions of me because I'm going to be reading Dan and Phil's part in this particular chapter of Bad Boys Don't Smile. Please excuse my dogs. So I decided to read Dan and Phil's part, but like show you that this is Dan and this is Phil and then this is me. So you'll see like Dan on this side and then you'll see like Phil on this side. So this is what Dan looks like. Hey, and this is what Phil looks like. Hey! So, yeah, I'll be playing 3 different parts. You'll basically see Dan, and then you'll see Phil, and then you'll see me. And so that's how it's gonna go today, because I decided to do more editing on myself. So, I'm gonna give you a small, brief little introduction on what Bad Boys Don't Smile is. So basically, it's a fanfiction where Dan is a bad boy. You know, he's a loner. He's actually dealing with a lot. I recommend you read the story to find out what he is dealing with. But he's a bad boy, and you know, people fear him because, you know, he's a bad boy. He doesn't talk. He's mysterious. And then Phil, he's like a kind of like a happy-go-lucky guy, and he's very friendly, and he likes to see people smile. And one day, Phil gets attacked, and Dan saves him, and Phil is ever so grateful for that. They develop a friendship, and it's weird. And then, you know, I'm not gonna get into it more, but that's brief, like a small, brief, sucky, you know, way for me to say what's going on in the story up to this particular chapter in 11. Chapter 11 in Bad Boys Don't Smile is one of my favorite chapters besides the ending. But chapter 11 is one of my favorites. I'm gonna read it, and you'll see me going back and forth between Dan and Phil and me. So let's get this started. Chapter 11. Phanci. I hope you like me. So, and this is in Dan's point of view, by the way, but it does go out like in third person sometimes. Here we go. Psst. Dan, are you awake? Oh, I am now. Dan replies sleepily, rolling over and blinking his eyes to come face to face with Phil, the blue-eyed boy. The boy of my dreams. At first, he's surprised, but then he remembers that Phil is sleeping the night, and he decides that he likes the warmth of having a body beside him. Not in a weird way, though. No homo. Phil remains silent, just staring at Dan, his blue eyes so bright that they're almost glowing in the dark, resembling stars from Dan. What do you want, Phil? Dan asked sleepily while rubbing his eyes, his voice husky and rough with sleep. What time is it? Like 11, but that's besides the point, Phil whispers quietly. We're having a sleepover. This is supposed to be when the juicy gossip comes out. What are we, 12? Go back to sleep, Phil. Dan groaned, screwing his face up while yawning before he sighed deeply, drifting back to sleep. No, Dan, Phil complains, shaking him gently. Please, I want to get to know you better. Phil. Dan grumbles. Go away. Please, Dan, Phil begs, sitting up and flicking the bedside lamp, filling the room with a warm glow. Fine, 10 minutes. Dan sighs, sitting up beside Phil on the bed. Now what do you want? Well, with something I don't know about you. That I'd like to go back to sleep right now? Dan says flatly. I already knew that, Phil complains, huffing. I'll start then. I still get scared that I'm going to get attacked again. I can't walk outside after dark now. Your turn. Well, Dan stumbles, looking down his hands. I'm scared of letting my brother down. I had a sister, Phil says quietly, looking down, tears gathering in his eyes, making Dan's eyes widen in heartache. Oh my god, Phil. Dan stammers, reaching a hand onto Phil's knees, lost for words. It's okay, Phil says quietly. It was a long time ago. Your turn? I've never known what it's like to have parents before. I felt so guilty that my sister died. I wasn't there for her. My father cheated on my mother for 3 years before he died. I haven't walked into my sister's room since she died, because I know she won't be in there. I'm clinically depressed. I still write to my sister. If it weren't for Sean, I would be dead. Don't say that, Dan, Phil says, grinding him. It's the truth, Dan says quietly, looking down. Sometimes I even feel as I'm already gone, like I'm already dead to the world. You're never alone, Dan. I'm here for you. Sean needs you, Phil says, looking over at Dan. Maybe you've just isolated yourself too long. I'd rather be alone than have fake friends, Dan says simply. My friends aren't fake, Phil says confidently. Yeah, well, not everyone has that comfort, Dan says. Not everyone grows up with a stable life, with friends, with people who love you. Well, now you have me, Phil says, reaching over and placing an arm around Dan's shoulder. And I can't promise you anything, but you can try to make your life better. I can't, Dan whispers, his eyes cast to the ground. I'm too far gone. No one is. There is always hope. You just have to find it. Dan never expected to be having a deep and meaningful with Phil Lester to the late hours of the night. He needed expected for Phil to know him basically inside and out, and vice versa. But they do. And Dan never expected to end up crying on Phil's shoulder at 1 a.m. Finally letting out what he's been holding in all year. But that's what he ends up doing. But let's pause for a second. I recommend you guys read the story if you want to know the full entire story, because it is really good. It's really thought out. It is only 19 chapters, and that's including the epilogue. So it's really short, but it's so well developed. I cry every time I read it, and it is so meaningful to me because it's like I can relate on a personal basis. But anyway, let's continue. So let's flash this forward to the early morning of the hours, and this is still Dan's point of view, by the way. Dan wakes up early to the sound of his mother getting ready for work in the kitchen. He eases himself out of bed, leaving Phil tangled in the sheets, still out cold, snoring his head off. Dan headed downstairs to find his mother on the way out to work, a muesli bar in her hand and a bag over her shoulder. Mom? Dan says, trailing off as he looks at her. Her hair is tied up into a fancy bun, a few strands framing her face, which is adored with makeup. She has jewelry on and clean, stylish clothes. She doesn't look like the woman Dan sees every day at home lying in a bed. She looks almost normal. Man, you're up early, she comments, flickering him smile. I'm off to work now. Yeah, I can tell from your clothes and your chirpy attitude, Dan snaps, a scowl forming on his face. Dan, there's no need for that tone, his mother scolds. I'll use whatever fucking tone I want with you, Dan retorts angrily, shooting her a glare as she reaches for the front door handle. That's no way to speak to me. And who are you? Your mother? No, Dan says blankly. My mother lies in bed all day, forgets about her children, and absorbs herself in her own world, pain, not caring about what damage she has done to the people around her. Dan, his mother's voice is soft now, almost like a wounded or scared animal. It's not that simple. No, but you could at least try. If you're ready to pass it down to me, I'm not gonna let you ruin Sean as well, Dan says harshly before shoving roughly past her. He hears the front door click shut and lets out a deep sigh from the kitchen. It's early, so Dan tries to be quiet as he makes himself an instant coffee, sitting on the sofa and cradling the hot mug in his hands. He hates it how his mother turns into a different person. She seems to forget Dan and Sean when she's not home, when she lets depression take over. What upsets Dan the most is that the fact that she doesn't even try to fight her depression like Dan does. She just lets it consume her. And then there's Phil, with his lost sister, his kind words, and the sense of home he brings to Dan. Why does he make Dan feel so safe? The coffee isn't working, and it's only making Dan even more restless. I know the feeling. He needs something to calm him, something to stop his thoughts racing. They're speeding up, his mind is seemingly expanding, and unless he does something soon, he won't be able to stop it. He stands and races upstairs, scouring desperately through his drawers as Phil still snores softly on his bed next to him. Dan finally notices the right bottle, pouring 2 into his palm and then drowning them. He's still frantic though, the pills won't kick in that fast. So he manages to find a cigarette and walks back downstairs out into his backyard. He sits on the ground, leaning against the wall of his house and lighting the cigarette, the drugs inside almost instantly calm him. He knows it's risky, smoking at home with Sean around and Phil in his room, but it was the only way for Dan to stop himself from exploding. He sighs and leans back against the wall, his mind returning to a normal speed again. And now he's left on the ground, feeling like he's just a waste of space, just simply existing. The thing is, the drug takes pain away, caring brings. Phil Lester is dangerous if Dan wants to retain his reputation and normal way of life. So from that moment on, he decides to distance himself from Phil. Phil is the sun and Dan is the moon. Phil is bright and Dan is stuck in the dark. The sun and the moon don't mix. By the time Sean wakes up to watch cartoons, Dan is tired and ready for bed again. He had brushed his teeth and changed clothes, so all traces of smoke were gone. He leaves Sean sitting on the couch and walks back upstairs, sliding back into bed with a sigh, slipping straight into a deep sleep. What feels like only mere moments later, something is shaking Dan's shoulders. He sits up, slowly rubbing his eyes and looking up to see a smiling Phil. Rise and shine, Danny! Phil grins. Fuck off, Phil. Dan murmurs, pulling the covers back over him and rolling over onto the side. I want to sleep. Please, Dan? Phil begs, unaware of the fact that Dan has been up since 6. Nor is he taking 2 different drugs. We have things to do today. I don't care, Dan snaps. Well, I do, Phil says. I don't care, Phil. What about that conversation we had last night? Phil asked softly, frowning at Dan. Do you not care about that? As far as I'm concerned, that conversation never happened. Tell anyone what I said, and I will hurt you. Dan snaps, standing and shoving past Phil out of the room. Dan has read it left, so he doesn't see the devastated look on Phil's face and the tears well in his eyes. As far as Dan is concerned, he's done the right thing. He's broken, and he's making sure Phil won't cut himself on sharp edges as as Dan. He's just trying to protect Phil and himself, but all he's doing is hurting them both a little more. The end of the chapter. It's so well thought out. It's so good. I love this story to pieces. I truly recommend you read this story. Phanci, you are an amazing writer. I just love your stories and I can't wait for more updates. So I think we'll end it there. Well, I'll see you guys in the next video. Let me know what you want me to do. So as always, I will see you guys in my next video. Bye. Mwah. Bye bye. Crazy too. We accept all newcomers, we do. But we get judged a lot. We don't deal with going outside very well. We spend too much time on our phones if you couldn't tell. But what if we miss a post, not to mention we'd have to take a shower and divert attention from the videos and posts from all the people who keep me staring at my phone screen till 2:45. And I know every mine's 5 o'clock in the morning. I've got no regrets. You know what I said.